see you guys in the dark.
I'm an American guy who was teaching English in China. I'd been in China for a few years, and it was genuinely a good experience, except for this story. So I had been sort of casually dating another expat until she decided to go back to her home country. We parted on good terms, but after a while, I was starting to feel a little lonely and decided to try a Chinese dating app, basically a Tinder clone. I quickly matched with a Chinese girl who went by the English name Jenny, living in the same city as me, but originally from another province. After chatting for a while, we met for lunch, really hit it off, and wound up spending the day together 4 days in a row. That's when she said she was moving back to her hometown, but that she still wanted to be friends with me. I said that was okay, and kind of thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. We wound up chatting for hours every day and night after work, and in the morning before work. After about a week, she invited me to visit her in her hometown, and I accepted. On a long weekend, I flew into her hometown, and we basically spent the whole time in the hotel. The day before I was supposed to go back, I went out to buy a bottle of water from the convenience store downstairs, and when I got back to the room, she asked me, "Who's Nancy?" Turns out she had been using my laptop, turned on the VPN, and was browsing through my Facebook page where she found a message from 8 years earlier to a girl I had been dating at the time. I told her Nancy was an ex-girlfriend, and she went absolutely ballistic. Said we couldn't be together because clearly I was actually in love with Nancy, then stormed out of the room in tears. I ran after her, telling her that I hadn't spoken to Nancy in at least 5 years, and that she, Jenny, was the only person I was interested in. She calmed down, came back to the hotel, and we ended the visit on a high note. About a week after I returned to Beijing, and still chatting for hours every night and every morning, Jenny sent me a text saying that she had good news. She was moving back to Beijing, and we could be together. She said she wasn't ready to move in with me permanently yet, but asked if it would be okay to stay at my place for a few weeks until she found an apartment of her own. I said yes, of course, and soon she was living with me. We were in love. I fell hard for her, and she for me. This is when the problem started in earnest. At the time, I shared the apartment with 3 people, 2 of whom were women. I worked in a language school for adults, and I would say that about 75% of the students were women. In addition, almost all the Chinese staff were women, and about half of the foreign teachers were women. Anytime I was so much as said hello to a female roommate or colleague in her presence, she accused me of cheating on her. Once asked me if I liked living in that apartment because I could hear my female roommates peeing from the living room. The walls were ridiculously thin. Multiple times a day, she would ask how many times I'd sleep with students or colleagues. Never, for the record. And when I said I hadn't, she angrily accused me of lying to her. And I do mean angrily, by the way. Sometimes she'd throw shoes or other heavy objects at me before dumping me, storming out of the house with me trailing behind, begging her not to go until she relented, and things would be good for the rest of the day, maybe 2 days on the outside. This cycle repeated for about 2 months, until finally I had enough, and one day she left. I didn't go after her. That night I paid for her to stay in a hotel on her own. The next morning she called me in tears, threatening to kill herself. I went to the hotel to try to calm her down, and eventually she composed herself and seemed to have more or less accepted that it was actually over, so I accompanied her to a real estate agent so she could find an apartment of her own. Then I went to work. That night she texted me a lot. The next morning she texted me a lot. The next night she was waiting for me at my workplace, and I told her I didn't want to see her. For weeks after we broke up, she was constantly calling me, texting me, randomly showing up at my apartment or my workplace, and refusing to leave. Eventually I blocked her on my phone and my WeChat, Chinese social media, and told the receptionist at work to watch out for her because I was worried she might do something to cause problems at my job. After a few more weeks, she seemed to have gotten the hint, and I was kind of hopeful that I would just spend some time single and try to get over her. That's when I received a friend request on WeChat from someone I didn't recognize. The name was unfamiliar, and the profile picture was an anime character, so there wasn't really any identity clues. Like I said before, I work as an English teacher for adults. I don't mind adding students on WeChat so they can ask questions about English whenever they want, and I just assumed this was a student who'd gotten my account from another student or a staff member. And when I asked who it was, she basically confirmed it. She said she was a former student who had gotten my account from a British teacher and had a couple of questions about how American English differed from the British variety. No problem. Over the next couple of weeks, she sent me a few questions every 3 or 4 days, occasionally making friendly small talk in between. Eventually, that friendly small talk seemed to be getting a little uncomfortably romantic, so I told her that I was still getting over a painful breakup. I was happy to be friends with her, but I wanted to be clear that that was that. She said fine, but she kept pushing the envelope a little more every time. She eventually told me that she was also getting over a breakup and described a situation that sounded remarkably similar to my situation from Jenny's point of view. I was definitely suspicious at this point, but I thought I was being paranoid. I thought there was no way that anyone could make up a fake identity just to get back in touch with me on social media. It must be a coincidence. Anyway, after a little more chatting, this former student asked me if I wanted to meet her for dinner. When I told her no, she confessed that my suspicions were correct, that it actually had been Jenny this whole time. The next day, she showed up at my work again and started shouting at me while I was trying to teach a class. The day after that, I gave my notice at work and bought a plane ticket back to the States. She came to my apartment one more time before I left China, and I told her I was going home. In the first few months after I left China, she tried a few times to add me on WeChat, and once I unblocked her, and we had a genuine chat where she tried to convince me to come back. Eventually I did actually go back to China, but I didn't tell her, and it's now been about 6 months since the last time I heard from her. So hopefully it's all behind me now. I hope she can find some peace in her life. This is the only place that I can think to post this. For the third time, someone tried to follow me home. To give some backstory, I had a stalker when I was pregnant. It was a woman that would come to my job and make creepy comments about how she was going to steal my child. I made police reports and tried to get a restraining order, but was basically told by police that it was just my hormones causing me to be overprotective, and that someone giving me the creeps didn't count as a stalker. She came to my job every day, multiple times a day, but I was overreacting according to them. Now, a year later, in a new town, I have had someone try to follow me home 3 separate times within 2 months. Always a different car, and I always make sure that if I feel like I'm being followed, that I take random roads and head back towards the police station. But tonight, the car followed me down my road before I realized it. I was able to go down a separate road, and found I was still being followed. At this point, I don't know what to do. I have everything locked down. You can't find me on social media. I don't tell people where I live. I barely go out alone unless it is to work and back. What do I do when the police think I'm crazy for thinking this woman has come back after a year into another town just to find me? I work at a large crafting store in California, and have been there for a year and 8 months now. A little background before I explain what's going on. So last year, we hired a guy. We'll name him Hayden. Hayden was a little quiet on the first day, but quickly became more talkative, and over the next couple of weeks, started to never stop talking. He would constantly say weird shit. For instance, one day he was put in charge of building furniture. Our store carries stuff like furniture and home decor as well. He was apparently having difficulty assembling the table he was working on, and said something about cutting his wrist if he can't figure out how to put it together. Another time we were both working in a stock room, and he kept talking about how much he looked like the Parkland shooter Nicholas Cruz. I'll admit he did in fact look like that kid, which was kind of creepy. I remember one day I had gotten off of work and was waiting for my ride to pick me up when out of nowhere Hayden walked up behind me. He just stood there with an awkward smile on his face, and I politely asked him, "What's up?" He said something to the effect of, "Oh, nothing, just enjoying my lunch break. I'm thinking about going inside Taco Bell, right across the parking lot from our work, and shanking someone." He pretty much laughed and said he was joking after that. When my wife picked me up, we saw him walking towards the Taco Bell and just flashed us this creepy-ass ear-to-ear smile. So the last straw for me was when he and I were assigned to work our spring freight and get it loaded up on a large U-boat. Our shift started at 7 a.m. and was over at noon. It was 11, and we still hadn't finished our task because Hayden just wouldn't stop goofing around. He would also work very slowly on purpose and would only take one item to the U-boat at once. Our boss came to where we were working and was upset that we weren't done yet. He told us we both get written up if the job wasn't finished before we were off. I was pissed off at this point, and Hayden knew it. He seemed to feel bad for pretty much getting me in trouble and apologized. He then said something that really concerned me. He said in the most serious tone I had never heard him speak in since meeting him, "If I get fired, I'll shoot this place up." He went on to say that he knew where all the emergency exits are and would first shoot all the cashiers, then move on to the other employees in the store. I'll admit, I didn't immediately report what he said, but it did have me on edge, and I kept thinking about what if. After some convincing from my wife, I finally did the right thing and informed my manager. They took a written report from me and contacted the police. After 2 more days of working with Hayden, he was fired and subsequently arrested for his threats. The week after he got arrested, my boss held a meeting with the entire staff and told everyone what happened. After everyone left the meeting, he pulled me aside and revealed to me what the police and Hayden talked about during the interrogation. I don't completely remember what he said, but Hayden apparently admitted that he said what he said and kept asking if I had been the one who reported him. Fast forward to a few weeks ago. I was working at the same store. I still am. And I was heading to the break room for a final break when I heard a voice from one of the aisles to the left. A man was standing next to the paint case and asked if I could get him some paint. While I was opening the case, he addressed me by name, which I immediately thought was weird because I wasn't wearing my name tag on this particular day. Out of curiosity, I asked him how he knew my name, and he said it was just a lucky guess, to which I thought was BS, mainly because his tone of voice seemed very sarcastic. The entire time I was getting his paint, he was staring at me with a smirk on his face. He then began to ask me questions about my name, which is the same name of a popular TV show character. He asked what year I was born, why my parents decided to give me that name, etc. At this point, I started to walk away, and as I had other things to do, the whole time I was walking away, he was still trying to talk to me. I heard him yelling my name from 3 aisles down. I went and stood in the warehouse until I thought he was gone. Later that same day, one of my coworkers asked me if I knew the guy who was buying the paint, and I told her that I didn't. She told me that he had approached her and asked her all kinds of questions about me, like if I'm a good worker, and if she likes me as a coworker. This is an ongoing issue too, as he's come into the store 2 other times, one being yesterday during my day off, and apparently asked where I was. I don't know for sure, but I suspect that this guy might be cousins with Hayden, as they sort of look alike and have similar mannerisms. Both look similar to the Parkland shooter and have the same creepy vibe. This might not be the scariest thing on here, but it's still pretty freaky. Tonight, I worked the closing shift and was outside getting cards after the store closed at 8 p.m. when 2 SUVs pulled onto the parking lot. One of them parked behind the store, and the other one parked in the main parking lot. I was standing in front of the entrance doors when a man dressed in all black and wearing a hood stepped out of one of the SUVs. Another guy walked up next to him, and they both started approaching the store. I politely told them that we were closed, and then I looked down to notice a large baseball bat in a hoodie guy's hand. I started repeatedly ringing the bell to be let back inside, and these two guys were just pacing back and forth in the lot, staring right at me. My manager let me in and called the police. The guys were long gone when they got there. This could have easily been a totally unrelated incident, but I thought I'd still update because the whole thing makes me think it could be you-know-who. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.